A woman paid for an elderly man's groceries and got fired. The next day, she was shocked when someone knocked at her door. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, and Maya hurried through the aisles of the small grocery store where she worked. The familiar scent of fresh produce, spices, and baked bread filled the air as she rang up customers, smiling at familiar faces, though her mind drifted to unpaid bills piling up at home. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next fantastic stories. In her early 30s, Maya worked double shifts to make ends meet, quietly juggling the weight of debt, rent, and an uncertain future. Still, she carried herself with warmth, finding satisfaction in helping others, even if life hadn't been particularly kind to her. Just as she was finishing with a customer, an elderly man walked up to her register, moving slowly, carefully clutching a few items: a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a small tin of beans. His clothes were neatly pressed but worn with age, and his hands trembled slightly as he set the items on the counter. Maya could see that his gaze was distant, eyes shadowed with exhaustion or perhaps something deeper. She felt a sudden pang of empathy, a quiet ache she recognized in him. She smiled, as she always did, but this time it was softer, warmer. The man looked up at her as she totaled his items, but when he saw the number on the screen, his face fell. Fumbling through his wallet, he sighed, realizing he didn't have enough. Maya saw the disappointment flash across his face, and for a brief moment, her heart twisted. She knew that feeling well, the shame of not having enough, of holding up the line, of life's little humiliations. Without a second thought, she reached into her own pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and paid the balance herself. The old man looked up, his face etched with disbelief and something like gratitude, though his pride seemed to hold back words of thanks. He muttered a quiet, "Thank you," and left the store, casting one last, lingering look at her before stepping out into the bustling street. Maya brushed it off, resuming her work with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a small gesture, she thought, but one she hoped might lift his spirits. Little did she know, though, that someone had been watching. The store manager, Mr. Higgins, a wiry man with thin, impatient eyes, had witnessed the entire exchange. At the end of her shift, he pulled her aside, his expression cold and unyielding. "Maya," he began, his voice clipped, "I don't know what you were thinking, but we can't have employees giving away store items for free. I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go." Her heart dropped. She tried to explain, her voice thick with panic, but Mr. Higgins had already made up his mind. She was told to leave immediately, to pack her things and hand over her uniform. Maya left the store in shock, walking home in a daze. She'd lost her only source of income over a few dollars for a stranger she'd likely never see again. That night, as she sat on her bed staring blankly at her bills, the weight of everything seemed to come crashing down. For the first time in months, she felt a strange emptiness creep in, a haunting silence where hope used to be. But as dawn broke, Maya was startled by a knock on her door. She hadn't expected anyone, and certainly not so early. When she opened it, she was greeted by a well-dressed man with a serious expression, holding a small envelope. "Are you Maya?" he asked. She nodded, her mind racing with questions. The man's words that followed would change her life forever. Maya stared at the man standing in her doorway, her pulse quickening with confusion and a flicker of hope. The man's expression was unreadable, formal, almost stoic, but there was a spark of something in his eyes as he looked at her. He held out a crisp envelope, his gloved hand steady and confident. "This is for you," he said, his voice deep and controlled. Hesitantly, Maya took the envelope, its weight unexpectedly heavy in her hands. She looked up, about to ask who had sent it, but the man was already turning to leave, his posture erect and purposeful. "Wait," she called after him, her voice thick with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Who sent this? Why?" The man paused for a moment, his back still turned. "I'm only the messenger," he replied without looking back. "But someone took notice of your kindness." With that, he disappeared down the narrow hallway, leaving Maya standing alone, clutching the envelope as if it might slip away. Heart pounding, she closed the door and sank onto her couch, staring at the envelope in her hands. It was unlike any she'd ever seen, thick and elegant, with her name written in precise, looping handwriting. She ran her fingers over the letters, feeling the weight of mystery and urgency behind each curve and line. Finally, unable to wait any longer, she tore it open, her hands trembling as she pulled out a single sheet of paper. Inside was a letter, written in that same careful script. The words blurred for a moment as her eyes filled with anxious tears, her mind already racing with questions she couldn't yet answer. She forced herself to take a deep breath, grounding herself before she began to read. "Dear Maya," it began. "You don't know me, but I was touched by your kindness. Few would act so selflessly, especially when they themselves have so little. You reminded me of something precious that I had almost forgotten, something that no amount of money could ever buy." Maya paused, her heart clenching as she read. Each word seemed to pierce through the layers of pain and disappointment that had accumulated over the years, reaching a part of her that had almost forgotten how to hope. She continued reading, her fingers tightening around the paper. "As a token of gratitude, I wish to meet with you. My assistant will arrange everything. Please accept my offer and allow me to repay a small part of the kindness you showed me." The letter was signed with a single initial, A. No last name, no other details. Maya was stunned. She reread the letter, trying to make sense of it. She thought of the elderly man from the store the day before, his frail hands and the quiet gratitude in his eyes. But who was he really? And why had he sent someone to deliver this message, rather than coming himself? She stayed up late that night, lying awake with thoughts spiraling in every direction. Part of her wanted to dismiss the whole thing as a strange coincidence, but another part, the part that still clung to a sliver of hope, whispered that maybe, just maybe, her small act of kindness had opened a door she'd never imagined possible. The following morning, just as the letter had promised, the same man appeared at her door, this time with a respectful nod and a single question. "Are you ready, Miss Maya?" She felt her breath hitch, her hand instinctively reaching for the worn strap of her purse. "Ready," she echoed, still not entirely believing any of it was real. But there was something about the man's expression that filled her with a strange calm, as if this path was one she was always meant to walk. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. She followed him down the stairs and into a sleek black car waiting outside. As the door closed behind her, the engine hummed softly, and Maya realized that, for the first time in years, she was heading somewhere unknown. The car's leather seats were cool beneath her hands as Maya sat in silence, her gaze fixed on the passing streets. Everything outside the window felt both familiar and foreign. The small coffee shop where she used to grab her morning cup, the corner store that always had fresh flowers in the window. But today, the world seemed veiled in a quiet mystery. Beside her, the driver was silent, his face stoic as he navigated through winding streets and out of the city, toward a destination unknown to her. After about 30 minutes, they left the bustling urban landscape behind, entering a quieter, upscale neighborhood where old trees lined the streets and the houses were grand, almost stately. Maya felt a pang of nervousness. She had never been in a place like this, where homes were surrounded by high gates and manicured lawns. Everything here spoke of a life of privilege, of an existence far removed from her own. Eventually, the car slowed and turned into a driveway lined with tall hedges. At the end of the drive stood an elegant mansion, its white stone walls gleaming in the soft morning light. Maya's heart raced as the car came to a halt, her thoughts tangling in a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. She'd known that something unusual was happening, but nothing could have prepared her for this. A stranger's mansion, an invitation from someone who was clearly very wealthy. The driver stepped out, walking around to open her door with the same formal grace he'd shown all along. "This way, Miss Maya," he said, motioning toward the grand entrance. Maya hesitated, clutching her purse tightly. A million questions circled in her mind, each one louder than the last. Who was this? Why had they summoned her here, and what could they possibly want from someone like her? She took a steadying breath and stepped out of the car, her feet sinking slightly into the gravel beneath her. Following the driver, she walked up a sweeping set of steps that led to enormous double doors. As they approached, the doors swung open, and a woman dressed in a crisp black suit greeted her with a polite, welcoming smile. "Miss Maya, welcome. Right this way, please," the woman said, gesturing toward a long hallway. The interior of the mansion was even more opulent than she had imagined, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and art that seemed to belong in a museum. Maya couldn't help but feel out of place, a strange visitor in a world of luxury and refinement. The woman led her into a sitting room with tall windows that let in a flood of natural light, casting a warm glow over the antique furniture and ornate rugs. There, by the window, stood a man she didn't recognize, a tall, elegant figure dressed in a tailored suit, his hair silvered at the temples. He turned as she entered, his gaze soft but penetrating. "Maya," he greeted, his voice deep and calm. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. His eyes held a kindness she hadn't expected, as though he understood her bewilderment and wanted to put her at ease. "I imagine you have many questions," he continued, gesturing for her to sit. She took a seat on the edge of a velvet armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she looked at him, trying to understand who he was and why he had invited her here. "Yes. Why am I here?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled gently, his expression both compassionate and thoughtful. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Richard Hamilton," he said. "The man you helped yesterday, he is my father. And he spoke of you, of your kindness, with a gratitude I have rarely seen." Maya's eyes widened, a surge of recognition filling her chest. The elderly man, the one she had helped with groceries, was this man's father? But why had it mattered so much to them? She tried to speak, but no words came. Richard leaned forward, his gaze sincere. "I know it may seem a small thing to you, but your gesture left a profound impact on him. My father, he's a proud man, and he doesn't easily accept help. Yet, in you, he saw something that moved him deeply." He paused, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "You see, my father was once a man of wealth and power, but age has taken much from him. He's been grappling with that, with the difficulty of no longer being the man he once was." Maya felt her throat tighten as she listened. She had sensed a quiet struggle in the old man's eyes, a glimpse of sorrow, but she hadn't realized just how much pain lay beneath the surface. Richard's gaze softened further. "My father insisted that we find you. He wanted to thank you personally, to repay you in some way. And so, here we are." Maya sat quietly, absorbing Richard's words, still grappling with the shock of it all. It was hard to reconcile the frail, humbled man she had helped in the grocery store with the image of a powerful figure. And yet, his pride and quiet struggle suddenly made so much sense. She remembered the hesitation in his eyes, the way he'd fumbled with his wallet, and she felt a pang of empathy all over again. Richard took a breath, his face thoughtful. "My father is a complicated man," he continued. "He built his life from the ground up, working tirelessly to provide for us. But the years have changed him, and he now faces a new chapter, one that's hard for him to accept." He paused, his gaze turning inward. "It's painful to watch someone you love face such vulnerability. That's why what you did, Maya, was more than just an act of kindness. It reminded him that dignity isn't about wealth, but about compassion." Maya felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of humility and wonder. She hadn't thought much about her action, she'd only wanted to help someone in need. "I didn't do anything special," she murmured, almost embarrassed. "I just saw that he needed a hand." Richard's gaze softened further, a hint of a smile forming on his lips. "And sometimes, the simplest gestures mean the most," he replied. "My father believes people don't care about one another anymore, that the world has lost its empathy. But you proved him wrong." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table to her. "He wanted you to have this. Please, consider it a token of his gratitude." Maya stared at the envelope, her mind racing. She hadn't expected any kind of reward. In fact, she felt a strange discomfort at the thought of being paid for something she had done out of compassion. "I don't know if I can accept this," she said hesitantly, her fingers hovering over the envelope but not quite touching it. Richard nodded, as if he'd anticipated her response. "My father thought you might feel that way," he admitted. "But he asked me to urge you, not for his sake, but for yours. He believes everyone deserves to have a hand extended to them once in a while, and this, well, it's his way of returning the favor. Maya took a deep breath, finally picking up the envelope and turning it over in her hands. It was light but carried an unexpected weight in her heart. Her thoughts drifted to her bills piling up at home, the anxiety she'd been pushing aside for months, hoping things would somehow work out. Maybe, she thought, just this once, it was okay to let someone help her. She opened the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly, and gasped as she pulled out a check. The amount written was more than she had ever seen in her life, more than enough to cover her debts and even give her a chance to start anew. Tears filled her eyes, and she looked up at Richard, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. It's more than I could ever dream of. Richard's smile was gentle, understanding. You've already repaid us, Maya, in ways you can't imagine. My father is a proud man, as I said. He rarely shows emotion, rarely admits his own vulnerabilities. But after meeting you, he spoke of kindness as though it was something precious, something he hadn't felt in years. Richard's gaze softened as he watched her, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. It's been a long time since I've seen him that way. Maya nodded, her emotions caught between gratitude and disbelief. This chance meeting had led her down a path she never could have imagined. Please tell him, thank you, she said softly. And that I'm grateful for him, too. Richard leaned forward, his expression turning serious. There's one more thing, he said, his voice dropping slightly. My father has asked for you to visit him. He wishes to thank you in person. Maya's breath caught as she processed Richard's words. Visiting the elderly man felt daunting, especially now that she knew his background. The stakes seemed suddenly high, as if her small act of kindness had plunged her into a world of privilege and expectation, a place she wasn't sure she belonged. But the thought of seeing him again, a man who had lived through what must have been a lifetime of success and struggle, now wrestling with vulnerability, stirred something deep within her. Maybe, she thought, there was still something left to give, a way to honor the brief connection they had shared in the grocery store. Yes, she replied finally, her voice steadying. I'd be honored to meet him again. Richard nodded, his face showing a hint of approval, almost as if he'd hoped for that answer. Thank you, Maya, he said quietly. It will mean the world to him. He rose from his seat and gestured toward the hallway. If you're ready, I'll take you to him now. Maya stood up, her heart thudding as she followed Richard down the hall. They passed through several grand rooms, each one filled with artifacts and portraits that seemed to tell stories of generations past. Her eyes lingered on a portrait of a young man in a military uniform, a proud, resilient figure who looked just like the elderly man she'd met. There was a fierce determination in his gaze, a confidence that she recognized, though faded, in the man she'd helped. At last, they reached a smaller, cozy room filled with warm light and shelves lined with well-worn books. And there, seated in an armchair by the window, was the elderly man. His face softened as he saw her, a warmth and familiarity brightening his expression. He rose slowly, his movements careful but steady, and took a few steps toward her. Maya, he greeted, his voice softer than she remembered, yet filled with something profound. Thank you for coming. His words held a sincerity that made her heart ache. She realized he wasn't just thanking her for her visit, but for everything, for the quiet act of compassion that had somehow bridged the distance between their very different lives. She smiled, feeling a wave of emotions rise within her. Thank you, sir, for this, she replied, glancing down at the check still clutched in her hand. It's more than I could have ever imagined. She felt her voice falter, the weight of gratitude too immense to put into words. The old man waved a hand dismissively, his gaze kind but unwavering. It's nothing, my dear, he said. Money is just paper until it's used for something meaningful. He paused, his face growing thoughtful. What you gave me yesterday, however, was something no amount of wealth could buy. Maya felt her cheeks flush, her heart heavy with humility. I didn't do much, she murmured. Just wanted to help. The elderly man's eyes glistened as he took her hand in his, his grip gentle but firm. It's rare to find someone who sees a stranger's dignity, especially when they have so little of their own to give. He paused, a distant look passing over his face. I used to think that kindness was a thing of the past, a memory. But you proved me wrong, Maya. They stood in silence for a moment, and she felt a deep connection between them, as if their lives had somehow been woven together by fate, each of them filling a space the other didn't even know existed. Finally, the man cleared his throat, breaking the stillness. I want you to see this as a new beginning, Maya, he said, his voice steady but layered with emotion. Whatever you choose to do with that check, know that you have my support. And if you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she blinked them away, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I don't know how to thank you enough, she whispered. I'll never forget this. The man smiled softly, his face lighting up with a quiet joy. And I won't forget you, he replied. You've given me hope, Maya, a gift more precious than you realize. With a final, grateful squeeze of her hand, he released her, and Maya felt an unspoken bond settle between them, a bond born of compassion, respect, and the realization that sometimes, a single moment of kindness could transform lives in ways unimaginable. As she left the room, she felt a lightness in her heart, a sense of purpose and hope that she hadn't felt in years. And as she walked down the hall toward the waiting car, she knew that her life would never be the same. As the car pulled away from the mansion, Maya found herself lost in thought, gazing out the window as the scenes of the city blurred past. The check lay folded in her purse, feeling almost surreal, a lifeline, a door to a world of possibilities she had never dared imagine. Her mind raced with ideas and questions, her heart swelling with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She arrived back at her small apartment, the familiar sight now taking on a new meaning. Each worn detail, the peeling paint, the tiny cracks in the walls, seemed like a reminder of the challenges she'd endured and, perhaps, an invitation to dream bigger. With a deep breath, she set her purse down and sank into her chair, clutching the check in her hands once again. But as the initial thrill began to fade, a swirl of doubts crept in. How would she use this gift? What could she possibly do that would honor the incredible generosity she had received? She found herself pacing her apartment, staring out the window as her mind drifted back to her past, the years of hard work, the sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she had set aside out of necessity. One memory rose above the others, soft but insistent, as if calling her back. Long ago, before life's demands had grown so heavy, she had dreamed of opening a small cafe, a place filled with warmth and good food, where people could come not just to eat, but to feel welcome, to feel at home. It was a vision that had given her strength in her youth, one she had clung to during late nights and long shifts. She had even started saving for it, but with time, her modest savings had been eaten away by rent, bills, and emergencies, until the dream felt like a distant, unreachable past. But now, with the check in her hands, that dream began to breathe again. Her heart raced with possibility, her mind spinning with images of cozy tables, the smell of freshly baked bread, the soft hum of conversation filling the space. She imagined herself behind the counter, welcoming people with a smile, offering them not just food, but a place to feel seen and cared for, a place, she realized, like the one she had needed so many times herself. 4 hours, she sat in her tiny kitchen, a pen and notebook in hand, sketching out her ideas, her plans, her hopes. She poured every part of herself into the pages, the weight of each line carrying years of longing and perseverance. By midnight, her kitchen table was covered in notes and drawings, recipes, layouts, names for the cafe, all of them expressions of a dream she had almost forgotten she had. But as she looked over her work, another thought crept in, one that left her with a pang of guilt. She remembered the elderly man's eyes, the look of pride he still carried even in his frailty. He had given her this chance, this incredible opportunity, not knowing the depth of her own hardships, her hidden battles. And what had she really given him in return? A small gesture of kindness, a moment of respect, yes, but did that truly compare to the generosity he had shown her? The question lingered, and with it came a growing sense of determination. She realized that if she was going to honor this gift, she couldn't just take the money and disappear from his life. She owed him more than that. She owed him a chance to see what his kindness had set in motion. The following day, she found herself back at the mansion, her pulse quickening as she stood before the door. She hadn't told Richard or the elderly man that she would return, and she wasn't entirely sure what she would say. But something deep within her urged her forward. A butler answered the door, his expression polite but slightly surprised to see her. "Miss Meyer," he greeted, "this is an unexpected pleasure. Is there something we can do for you?" Meyer hesitated, gathering her courage. I'd like to speak with Mr. Hamilton. I mean, with Richard's father," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "If he's willing to see me, that is." The butler gave a small nod, gesturing for her to step inside. "Of course, Miss Meyer. Please, wait here. I'll let him know you've come." As she waited in the foyer, her thoughts swirled, and a nervous energy filled her chest. She didn't know how he would react or what he would think of her plans. But she knew, deep down, that she had to share them with him, to show him that his gift was more than just money, that it had rekindled a dream, a purpose. After a few moments, the elderly man appeared, moving slowly but with a quiet dignity. His eyes softened as they met hers, and a faint smile touched his lips. "Meyer," he greeted warmly. "This is a surprise." She took a steadying breath, meeting his gaze with newfound resolve. "I know I thanked you before," she began, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "But I don't think words can really capture what your kindness has given me. And I wanted you to know that, well, I've decided how I'm going to use your gift." He raised an eyebrow, interest lighting his expression as he gestured for her to sit. "I'm listening," he said, settling into a chair across from her. Maya smiled, her heart pounding as she shared her vision. A small cafe filled with warmth and hospitality, a place where people could come and feel at home, where kindness was served as naturally as the food. As she spoke, the elderly man's eyes brightened, a spark of pride and admiration filling his gaze. When she finished, he leaned forward, nodding with a look of approval she hadn't expected. "Maya," he said softly, "it sounds like you're creating something beautiful, something this world could use a little more of. And nothing would make me prouder than to see it come to life." Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her, warmed by the elderly man's approval. His kind, steady gaze made her realize that he truly believed in her dream, and maybe, for the first time, she was beginning to believe in it too. As she sat with him, sharing her ideas and plans, she noticed a sense of purpose and joy light up his face, almost as if her own aspirations had rekindled something in him as well. Their conversation drifted, touching on the details of the cafe, the decor, the recipes, the feeling she wanted to create. The man offered gentle suggestions, occasionally reminiscing about places he had visited in his younger days, cafes and bistros where he had found solace in simple, warm meals. For a moment, Maya forgot about her nervousness. They were just two people, united by a vision of something beautiful and good. But as the conversation wound down, Maya noticed a faint sadness in his expression, as if there were unspoken words weighing on him. Before she could ask, he reached over, his hand covering hers. His touch was gentle, yet there was an intensity in his eyes, a gravity that made her pause. "Maya," he began softly, "there's something I need to share with you." His voice was calm but laced with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "You see, my family's name and reputation, they carry more weight than you might realize." She frowned slightly, feeling the tension in his words. She had sensed he was someone of means, but she hadn't considered the full extent of his background or influence. She nodded, encouraging him to continue. "My name is Hamilton," he said, his gaze drifting toward a large portrait on the wall, a painting of a distinguished man in military attire, standing proudly. "But not just any Hamilton. My family has held influence in this city for generations. We've been known for our enterprises, our wealth, our philanthropy, and, I'm afraid, sometimes for our pride." Maya felt a chill run through her as the weight of his words settled in. She recalled stories she'd heard over the years about the Hamilton family, a name that held power, respected yet distant, almost mythical in the circles she'd never imagined crossing into. "I wasn't always the man you met," he continued, his voice lowering. "I was once a proud businessman, relentless, certain that everything could be won with strategy and wealth. But as the years wore on, I began to understand that success means little if you've forgotten the people it's meant to serve." He looked down, a faint regret shadowing his features. "My pride cost me many things: relationships, trust, love. But then, I met you, in that store, and you saw me not as a Hamilton, but simply as a man. You offered help without knowing my name, without expecting anything in return." Maya swallowed, her chest tightening as she realized the depth of his gratitude. She understood now that it wasn't just her kindness that had moved him, but the fact that she had shown him a dignity he had once taken for granted. And now, in this room filled with reminders of his past, she sensed he was trying to reconcile that pride with the vulnerability she'd seen in him that day. "Helping me the way you did," he paused, his voice thick with emotion. "It gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time, an understanding that there is worth in humility, that perhaps my family's legacy doesn't have to be only about power and wealth, but about grace, kindness, and second chances." Maya felt her eyes prick with tears. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "I think," she began softly, "that the world would be a better place if more people like you realized that. And maybe your legacy can be something more, something that reflects the kindness you've shown me." He smiled, the expression filled with quiet gratitude. For a moment, they sat in silence, each reflecting on the strange path that had brought them together. But just as Maya thought their conversation was winding down, he leaned in, his expression serious once more. "There's one last thing I'd like to ask of you, Maya," he said. "A request, if you'll accept it." She nodded, feeling a mix of curiosity and anticipation. "When your cafe opens," he continued, "I'd like to become its silent partner. Nothing more, just a small role. A way to contribute quietly, behind the scenes." His eyes softened, a spark of hope lighting them. "It would give me a way to stay connected, to support your vision without intruding. And, perhaps, it might even bring a bit of peace to the Hamilton name." Maya felt a surge of emotion, honor, gratitude, and a deep sense of connection to this man who had started as a stranger but now felt like something more. She nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "I'd be honored, sir. And, thank you. For everything." They shared a smile, both of them understanding that this was more than just a business arrangement. It was a partnership rooted in empathy and redemption, a chance for both of them to reshape their lives and build something beautiful out of the kindness they had shown each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Maya. Every day brought new challenges and decisions as she took the first steps toward bringing her cafe to life. Richard and his father were true to their word. They offered support and guidance from a respectful distance, giving her the freedom to build her dream while quietly providing resources and contacts she never could have accessed alone. The elder Mr. Hamilton remained a quiet but steadfast presence, fulfilling his role as her silent partner, and yet, she sensed that he found a renewed sense of purpose in their project. Maya poured herself into the work, carefully selecting each piece of furniture, every color on the walls, and each item on the menu. The cafe would be a small, welcoming space, a place where people from all walks of life could come for a warm meal, a comforting drink, and perhaps a moment of peace. She wanted it to feel like a home, a place to belong, where kindness was felt as soon as one stepped through the door. One evening, after a long day of planning and preparations, Maya found herself back at the Hamilton mansion for a quiet meeting with Mr. Hamilton. The room was dimly lit, casting a warm glow over the book-lined walls and antique furnishings. She shared updates on the cafe's progress, showing him pictures of the newly renovated space and the cozy chairs she'd chosen for the seating area. He listened attentively, his eyes alight with interest, nodding with approval as she spoke. After she'd finished, there was a quiet pause. Mr. Hamilton leaned back in his chair, a soft smile on his face. Maya, he began, his tone contemplative, I don't think I've ever told you what this project means to me. Seeing you bring this vision to life, it's reminded me of things I had long forgotten, of dreams and values that had once been precious to me. Maya looked at him, sensing the depth of his words. She felt grateful not only for his help but for the way he had entrusted her with a piece of himself, sharing parts of his past that had shaped the man he had become. She had come to see him as more than just a benefactor, he was a friend, perhaps even a kind of mentor. She felt connected to him, not through money or status, but through a shared journey of renewal. As he spoke, he paused, as though caught in a memory. His gaze softened, and he looked at Maya with a mixture of pride and sadness. There was a time when I, too, wanted to create something meaningful, something that would make a difference, he said. But in my pursuit of success, I lost sight of those dreams. The Hamilton name became a barrier between me and others, a wall that kept people at a distance. Maya listened quietly, sensing the weight of his regrets. She wished she could reassure him, tell him that he had already done so much to redeem himself. But she knew he needed to find that sense of peace on his own. Suddenly, he looked directly at her, his expression more serious. Maya, when the cafe opens, I'd like to ask something of you. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. This place you're creating, it's more than just a business. It's a place of kindness, a place where people like me, people who may feel lost or forgotten, can find comfort. I'd like to suggest that you open it to those who can't always pay, those who may simply need a warm meal and a moment of kindness. Maya's heart swelled at his words, a sense of deep alignment forming between them. She nodded, her voice filled with gratitude and determination. That's exactly what I want too, she replied. I want it to be a place where no one is turned away, where anyone who needs a meal or a bit of warmth can find it. A tear glistened in Mr. Hamilton's eye, though he quickly looked away, clearing his throat. Then let this cafe be that place. Let it be the legacy we build together, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. In that moment, Maya understood that they had become partners in a way that went far beyond the cafe's walls. This wasn't just a project or a business venture, it was a shared purpose, a commitment to something greater than themselves. A week before the cafe's grand opening, Maya spent her evenings arranging final details, the excitement growing with each passing day. She carefully crafted a small corner of the cafe into a community space, where people could leave messages of hope, stories of kindness, and small notes for strangers to find. She wanted it to be a place where people could connect in small but meaningful ways. On the eve of the opening, she received a small, handwritten note from Mr. Hamilton, delivered in an elegant envelope. Her heart fluttered as she opened it, reading his carefully chosen words. Maya, my dear friend, I believe in what you are creating with all my heart. You have given me back a piece of myself I thought was lost, and for that, I am forever grateful. May this cafe be the beginning of something beautiful, not only for you, but for all who walk through its doors. With the deepest respect, Ah. As she folded the note and placed it close to her heart, Maya knew she was ready. The journey they had taken together, the twists, the moments of vulnerability, the shared dream, had all led to this moment. She was about to open a place that wasn't just hers, but belonged to everyone who believed in the power of kindness. When she finally turned off the lights that night, she stood in the quiet of her cafe, feeling the anticipation settle like a soft blanket around her. Tomorrow, she thought, a new chapter would begin for both her and Mr. Hamilton. And together, they would welcome the world into a space built on hope and compassion. The morning of the cafe's grand opening dawned bright and clear, a golden light filtering through the windows as Maya made her final preparations. She moved through the cafe with a sense of purpose, setting out fresh flowers, checking each detail, and feeling the quiet thrill of her dream becoming reality. The walls were painted a warm shade of cream, with accents of soft green and blue, creating a space that felt like a hug, cozy and inviting. The air was filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, warm pastries, and homemade bread cooling on the counter. Outside, a small crowd had already gathered, their eager faces peering in through the windows. Among them were neighbors, old friends, and curious passers-by. Word of the cafe had spread quickly, and Maya was overwhelmed by the support. She took a deep breath, stepping to the door and opening it wide, her heart swelling as she welcomed her first customers with a smile that radiated warmth and gratitude. "Welcome to the Haven," she greeted them, her voice carrying a quiet joy. She watched as people filled the cafe, settling into cozy chairs, talking softly, and exploring the menu she had carefully crafted with love. Every dish held meaning, from her grandmother's lentil soup recipe to the buttery biscuits she used to make during her years working late shifts. It was her story, her life, offered to others as a meal. By midday, the cafe was bustling with life, the energy infectious. Friends shared plates of food, families laughed together, and strangers struck up conversations over steaming mugs of tea and coffee. Maya moved from table to table, greeting each guest, making sure everyone felt at home. Each smile, each kind word, filled her with a sense of purpose and joy that she hadn't felt in years. In the afternoon, as she poured a fresh pot of coffee for an elderly couple, the door swung open, and Maya glanced up to see Mr. Hamilton himself standing at the entrance. He was dressed neatly, with a small smile playing on his lips, and in his hands, he held a bouquet of wildflowers, soft and colorful, as if freshly picked from a meadow. She felt her heart skip, both from surprise and gratitude, and she rushed over to greet him. "You came," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded, his eyes bright as he took in the cafe, the warmth and life filling the space. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he replied. Handing her the bouquet, he continued, "These are for you, a small token for all you've created. You've turned a simple idea into something extraordinary, Maya." She accepted the flowers, her cheeks flushed with joy. "Thank you," she said softly. "None of this would have been possible without you. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." He looked around, his gaze lingering on the community corner where guests had already begun leaving handwritten notes of encouragement, gratitude, and hope. He smiled, his voice touched with pride. "You've given people something precious. A place to feel welcome, to be seen." At that moment, Maya noticed a young boy and his mother standing near the counter, their eyes scanning the menu. The boy looked worn and weary, his clothes a bit too big and his shoes frayed. The mother counted the coins in her hand, an anxious look on her face as she tried to decide what they could afford. Maya felt a pang in her heart, and without hesitation, she approached them, her voice gentle. "Please, don't worry about the cost," she said warmly. "Today's on the house. You're more than welcome here." The mother looked at her in surprise, a mixture of relief and gratitude filling her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly as she held her son's hand. "You have no idea how much this means." Maya glanced back at Mr. Hamilton, who was watching the exchange with quiet admiration. She smiled, knowing they had created exactly what they'd hoped, a place where people could feel cared for, no matter their circumstances. Throughout the day, Mr. Hamilton lingered in the cafe, greeting guests and quietly observing the lives unfolding around him. She saw him smile at a young couple sharing their first date, nod at an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner, and even take a few moments to chat with a single mother juggling two small children. Maya realized that, perhaps, this cafe was healing a part of him too, giving him a chance to connect with others in a way he hadn't in years. As evening approached, the crowd began to thin, and Maya finally found a moment to sit with Mr. Hamilton, her body weary but her heart full. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the window, casting a golden glow over the room. "You've done something remarkable here," he said finally, his voice quiet but filled with a deep pride. "This cafe, it's more than just a business. It's a sanctuary, a place where people can come to feel safe, even if only for a short while." Maya smiled, her gaze drifting over the tables and chairs that now held so many memories. "It's everything I dreamed it would be," she replied softly. "And it's only the beginning. I want this place to be here long after I'm gone, a legacy of kindness." She nodded, smiling as she remembered those early conversations, the uncertainty, the unexpected bond they'd formed. I remember. And I think we've done exactly that, she replied, her voice gentle. This place has brought peace to so many, including me. Mr. Hamilton looked at her with an expression that was both proud and wistful. I never told you this, he continued, his gaze drifting, but I was hesitant about our partnership at first. Not because of you, but because I feared that my legacy could overshadow your dream. That my past might taint what you were trying to build. Maya felt her heart swell, understanding the weight of his confession. Mr. Hamilton, your legacy isn't about wealth or power. It's about the kindness you've shown, the faith you had in a stranger's dream. You gave this place more than money, you gave it heart, and that's something no name or legacy could overshadow. He smiled, a deep warmth filling his eyes, as though her words had brought him a comfort he'd needed. Thank you, Maya, he whispered, for reminding me that kindness can be a legacy in its own right. And for giving me a place to find peace. They shared a quiet, knowing look, a bond beyond words. Maya knew that, no matter what, they had created something beautiful together, an enduring legacy rooted in compassion, far more precious than wealth or status. As they sat in the stillness, Maya's gaze drifted to the wall of notes. She rose from her seat, pulling a small piece of paper and pen from behind the counter, and quickly scrawled a few words. Returning to the table, she handed the paper to Mr. Hamilton, who looked at it curiously. On the paper, she had written, "You've given more than you know. May this place carry your kindness forward." A tear slipped down his cheek as he read her words, and he nodded, understanding. He reached out, placing the note on the wall among the others, letting his own message of gratitude and redemption join the chorus of voices that had come together to form the haven. Finally, with a contented sigh, Mr. Hamilton rose, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Thank you, Maya," he said one last time. "For everything." And as he walked out of the cafe and into the night, Maya knew that their journey had come full circle. She stood alone in the quiet cafe, the soft glow of the lights casting a golden warmth over her heart, knowing that tomorrow, and for many years to come, the haven would open its doors to countless others, each one finding a place to feel seen, understood, and loved. In that moment, she understood the true power of kindness, the way it could reach across generations, connect strangers, and build a legacy that would last far beyond either of them. It was a legacy woven from compassion, trust, and the quiet strength of a shared dream. And with that, Maya turned off the lights, a sense of peace settling over her, knowing that both she and Mr. Hamilton had found what they had been searching for all along. If you like this story, take the opportunity to see the others that are appearing on your screen right now. Subscribe to the channel and comment on what you thought of this story. See you soon. Bye.